air sealing is going to
Okay.
be air movement. Draftiness is air. That's literally what it is. It is air coming into your house, whether it's through walls, windows, other penetrations. That is a huge factor in a home's comfort. And so, helping people understand that, and then starting to get into the details. Okay, well, what does that mean for your home? If it's the windows, great. That's pretty easy. We can replace windows, right? Like window replacements are very, very common part of the remodeling industry, and can be done well. And, you can, in most cases, if you're getting even an average new window, you're far exceeding the window that you're replacing it with in terms of its efficiency. So windows are pretty easy. When it comes to air sealing of exterior walls, that's a lot more challenging most of the time. That gets into, okay, are we in a position where we need to retrofit this down to the studs, take the drywall off, take the plaster off, whatever those wall coverings are, to really get to all of the nooks and crannies that are causing these problems. And that's kind of the extreme. And, I think what oftentimes needs to happen, I worked on a renovation here in Pittsburgh earlier this year for a client, and we opted to just build another interior wall in front of it. So then it's like, okay, well, now you're giving up some square footage in the house, right? You're taking a room that used to measure 11 feet wide, and now it's measuring, 10 and change, because you've just added 2 additional, walls to be able to create a current high performance wall assembly in front of the one that's been there for 100 years and isn't doing a very good job. So there's lots of ways to address that. I think some simpler ways also are some of the things I know you've talked about from your experience, is also looking at air moving into the attic or, into the crawl space. So if you're able to get up into your attic and find the holes of where, when you're turning your air conditioner on and that cold air is finding its way into your attic where you don't want it, this room is still hot because the cold air is going up there. Well, let's find out how it's getting there and put a stop to it. So, crawling around in attics and crawl spaces is sometimes what needs to be done to find these areas. So those are really the first things that come to mind, again, in that scenario of what you described. Insulation is the second part. So when you said, if somebody calls you and says, this room is always hot or cold or something like that, that may be an air infiltration problem. It might also just be a matter of insulation that is either completely not there or installed poorly. So getting back to my story of, being boots on the ground to make sure that we were executing on all of the additional quality control measures in our new construction homes, when we decided to start pursuing, high performance certifications, I learned very quickly that the quality of the install of insulation makes a huge difference to a home's comfort levels later. So, throwing a fiberglass bat in a stud wall is, to most people, doesn't seem like a craftsman's work. Seems like it could be done by pretty much anybody that, you go pull off the street, but that is not the case. The quality of installation can make a big difference. So that would be another consideration if somebody, called me with some of those challenges that we would talk about right off the bat.
With insulation, what would the sort of poorly installed versus correctly installed installation look like, if we're talking like fiberglass rolls to bats, or what are you describing there that's like a good install?
So the highest value that you get from the performance of the insulation is actually in the air itself. And so a fiberglass bat is meant to be fluffy. It is not supposed to be compressed. So if you're putting it in a wall and you've got a plumbing pipe in that area of your stud bay, smushing your 3.5, your bat that was designed to be installed at 3.5 inches, smushing it down to an inch behind that pipe, you might as well not have it there at all. It's virtually doing nothing when it's smushed like that. So taking the time to cut insulation around those obstacles so that it remains fluffy is a big part of it. And then the continuity, ensuring that it is fluffy and that it has, a continuous plane across the face of the studs, so that when you get to the studs that you don't have any gaps or compression. And so it doesn't take a lot of additional time or effort. And it's one of those things that falls into the category of, if you do the job right the first time, it's really not hard to do it right. But if you come in and, this was a very, very common story, as I was alluding to earlier, where I would have to call the insulation company and say, you got to send the crew back out because the quality of install here is not there. And so, that becomes a burden to that contractor, right? They're making an extra trip, they're spending extra labor to do the job a second time. So anyway, that kind of gets back to that training and education of, the business owner of the insulation company said, yes, I understand that you need a quality install and I'm going to price your job accordingly. And I'm going to send a crew to give you a quality install. But then he or she forgets to actually teach the crew how to do it, when they show up. So, but yeah, that's a big part of insulation failures is just the way that it was installed altogether.
Okay. And with the bats specifically, forgive my ignorance, but like one side of them does have like a paper material. Would you include like proper taping? Because when I think of just throwing insulation, it's just like unrolling it, shove it in the cavity there and close up the wall. But does correct installation of insulation include the taping and is that part of the continuity and things like that? Yep,
absolutely. Yeah. So that's craft face. So that the craft facing on the fiberglass bats is what you're referring to. It's typically brown, and that is a vapor barrier. So that's not always going to be included on a fiberglass bat. That depends on climate zone. Kind of gets back into whether or not you're trying to design a wall that the vapor drive is going from the inside of the house out, or is it coming from the outside in, and where do you need to stop air? So that's what the craft paper is doing on those bats. And then yes, part of that quality install, if you go, anybody can Google what does a grade 1 installation look like of fiberglass bats, and that's what most third-party, certification programs, Energy Star, for example, one of the things that third-party inspector is looking for is they come out after installation and they confirm that it was installed to grade 1 standards. And that would include that craft paper typically is longer on the sides than the fiberglass bats, so that it can actually be applied to the face of the stud and stapled in place. So a beautifully installed fiberglass bat wall, when it's all said and done, you're going to see a very continuous layer of that brown paper stapled to studs. You won't see any pink, you won't see any compressions, you won't even see the side of any of the studs, because again, everything's going to be pulled out fluffy and stapled to the face of the stud. And so it's going to be it's pretty easy to spot right off the bat if you've done a good job.
Oh, very cool. That's great to know. Yeah, I remember, and insulation, I was helping my parents' neighbor go net zero on her her house, and we were going around with the infrared camera and everything, and we could see it. And I mean, the heat, you could put your hand on drywall that had no insulation. We're just talking like R13 bats or whatever, the rolls, and then insulate or drywall with just even a roll over it or a bat over it. And it was a crazy difference. You could feel it with your hand.
Yeah.
The heat coming through, because drywall is nothing, right? No R value at all, maybe 1 or something.
Very little.
Very little.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was really shocked at the difference when we were going through that, and what a difference insulation actually makes, even if it's just sort of thrown on top of it. This is an attic, where here in Florida, I mean, your attic's like 120 degrees or something like that, seeping through.
Yeah.
But and to back up a second, like say you get a call about a person who wants to lower their bills or become more efficient. Are you, I describe a scenario, but do you always kind of start at air sealing and maybe a blower door test as the first step? Knowing nothing, or?
Yeah, not necessarily. I think I went there first with the way that you would kind of pose the hypothetical, that if they called and said, it's drafty, or this room is hot or cold, that would be it. But if somebody just, said, I generally want, feel like my electricity, like my electric bill is higher than it should be, and I'd like to understand, how I might be able to reduce my electric bill, or just, I'm on a budget and, my electric bill is averaging $100 a month. I'd like to see if there's a way I can get it down to 80. What could we talk about? And then of course the conversation would focus on light bulbs, and even just like the very, very basic concept of, are you turning things off? Do you have things plugged into a power strip that you can just shut everything down at the end of the day? Is your home office still, sucking energy with, every blue light you see in a house these days, that's energy. Like everybody always has all these devices that have little lights on them. It's like, if you see a light, it's taking energy right now. Is that something you could turn off when you're not using it? Energy Star appliances is something that can be talked about, and then the efficiency of the major equipment, the HVAC and water heater if that's electric, and do they have other appliances? Do they have an extra refrigerator, freezer out in the garage, right? And how old is that? And is it sitting in 100-degree garage? So not everything would turn into an action item that people are necessarily willing or able to do, so if it's a home that has, a large family and they genuinely need a second refrigerator or freezer, and the only place that it could possibly go is in the garage, okay, at least now, right? Knowledge is the first part of of addressing any of these problems. Is now you at least know this is a choice you're making. You've realized that it's better for you to have that second refrigerator and have access to this food, and this is where it's going to be, versus deciding to eliminate it altogether and have to go to the grocery store more often, or whatever that means. So yeah, it would depend, to get back to your question, the way that the question would be asked of me, in terms of, I've got a drafty house, or my electric bill is too high, or whatever else someone might say. There's a lot of different ways to kind of tackle this overall topic of an efficient and high performance home.